Everyone shows you the inside of a tiny house. The kitchen, the loft, the composting toilet. Nobody shows you what happens when you step outside, because most tiny house yards look like an afterthought, a gravel patch and a folding chair. But in 2026, that has completely changed. I found 5 tiny homes where the yard is not an afterthought. It is the whole point, and the last one on this list uses a feature so simple that most builders have never even thought of it. Stick around, because number 5 will change how you think about what a backyard even is. Before we get into it, if you're new here, this is Affordable Tiny Homes, and every single video on this channel is built on real research, real pricing, and zero sponsored fluff. I am not reading you a builder's marketing brochure. I'm pulling actual specs, actual square footage, and actual dollar amounts, and telling you when something is genuinely worth it and when it is not. If that sounds like your kind of channel, hit subscribe now, because it genuinely helps this content reach more people who are trying to figure out affordable, honest housing options. Okay, let's get into it. Number 5 is what I am calling the Biophilic deck build, and it is based on a trend that landscape architects and deck builders have been pushing hard through 2026. The idea is simple. Instead of treating the deck as a flat slab bolted onto the house, builders are wrapping the deck around existing trees, building up planters into the structure itself, and using deck boards that mimic real wood grain so the whole thing reads as part of the landscape instead of something dropped on top of it. Here is the detail most videos skip. The boards making this possible are not the cheap composite you might remember from 10 years ago that looked plastic and felt hollow underfoot. In 2026, the premium standard is co-extruded composite decking, which means the board has a protective outer shell wrapped around a core, giving it deeper, more irregular wood grain variation, better fade resistance, and a surface that genuinely does not feel like plastic under bare feet. That distinction matters if you are budgeting, because co-extruded boards cost more per square foot than basic composite, but they're also the reason these decks can wrap around a live tree trunk or curve along a planter bed without looking like a mistake. If you're picturing this for your own build, picture warm-toned, multi-tone graining, not a flat single-color plank. Builders working in this style this year have talked about designing decks that feel like they grew out of the yard rather than being imposed on it. For a tiny house, this matters more than it would for a regular home, because your deck is not a bonus room. It is often your only extra room. A 280 square foot tiny house with a 100 square foot covered deck is functionally living like a 380 square foot home for most of the year in a mild climate. That is not a small difference. That is almost 40% more usable space, and it costs a fraction of what it would cost to add that same square footage inside 4 walls with plumbing, insulation, and a permanent roofline. The other reason this approach is spreading fast in 2026 is maintenance. A wrapped, tree-integrated deck built from co-extruded boards does not need annual staining, does not warp the way old pressure-treated lumber does, and resist the kind of surface mold you get in shaded, tree-covered yards. If your dream tiny house lot has mature trees on it, which most people want because shade is valuable and hard to replace, this is the design approach that actually works with those trees instead of forcing you to cut them down to make room for a flat rectangular deck. Number 4 is the Rooftop Terrace Tiny House, and this one is not a concept. It is already being built and sold. A Pennsylvania-based builder called Comak Tiny Homes has a model called the Terrace House that takes the idea of a modern yard and puts it on top of the trailer instead of beside it. Instead of a ground-level yard, you get a rooftop deck access from the second level, which on this particular build is used for stargazing and taking in the surrounding views. The whole unit runs 34 feet long, which is long enough that it needs special permits to move on the road, and it is listed around $106,000. That number is verified against the builder's actual pricing, so this is not a rough estimate. That is the real cost of stepping into this model. Now, is that expensive for a tiny house? Yes, compared to a basic shell you could build for a third of that. But here is the honest math I want you to actually sit with for a second. If you wanted a ground-level yard with a view in a location where views cost money, you are not paying for square footage anymore. You're paying for elevation and sight lines, and that kind of premium land can run you tens of thousands of dollars more than a flat, view-less lot, sometimes far more depending on the market. A rooftop deck lets you borrow the view instead of buying the land underneath it. You are effectively purchasing vertical space instead of horizontal space. And vertical space on a trailer is almost free once the structure is already engineered for it. That is a genuinely honest trade-off worth understanding before you assume tiny homes are always the budget option, because sometimes the smart move costs more upfront and still saves you money compared to the alternative. One more thing worth mentioning. Because this rooftop space doubles as your outdoor living area, the building needs proper structural engineering to handle foot traffic, furniture weight, and drainage at height, which is part of why this model is not the cheapest option on this list. You're paying for a deck that is also structurally part of the roof system. That is not a corner any responsible builder should cut. Number 3 is the gooseneck tiny house with a hidden rooftop deck, and this is one of my favorite examples on this entire list because the yard is not even on the ground. It is accessed through a skylight. A builder called Tru Form Tiny, based in the United States, actively offers premium custom configurations on their gooseneck platforms, including builds with an integrated rooftop deck that owners reach by climbing up through one of the egress skylights. The home itself leans hard into off-grid capability, and this is where the specs get genuinely impressive. Full insulation using rock wool, a wood-burning stove for heat, and a 48-volt Victron solar system running the electrical side of the house. This is not an entry-level off-grid setup. This is the kind of infrastructure you would spec into a cabin meant to survive a real winter, not just a weekend getaway. What is interesting here is the design logic behind the rooftop deck itself. Because the bedroom sits up in the gooseneck section to get full standing height, which most tiny houses cannot offer in the sleeping area, the builder used the roof above that section as usable outdoor space instead of leaving it as dead, wasted real estate. That is the entire mindset behind a good modern tiny house yard in 2026. Nothing is wasted. Every surface either lives inside or lives outside, and nothing just sits there doing nothing, collecting rain and taking up structural weight for no functional reason. Accessing a deck through a skylight also solves a problem you might not think about until you actually live tiny, which is interior stair space. A conventional exterior stairway to a rooftop deck eats up either interior square footage or exterior footprint. Going up through an egress skylight means the access point already existed for safety code reasons, so the builder is not sacrificing anything extra to give you that outdoor space. It is a clever example of a home doing two jobs with one feature. And that kind of dual-purpose thinking is exactly what separates a genuinely well-designed tiny house from one that just looks good in photos. Quick pause, because if you're the kind of person who actually cares about these details, the structural thinking, the honest pricing, the trade-offs nobody else mentions, that is genuinely rare on this platform. And it is the entire reason this channel exists. If you have not subscribed yet, now is a good moment, because number 2 and number 1 are, in my opinion, the two smartest yard designs on this entire list. Number 2 is the Zone Micro Yard, and this is where 2026 landscaping trends get genuinely clever for small lots. Instead of one flat yard doing everything, deck and landscape designers this year have been building distinct zones into small outdoor spaces, a dining zone, a lounging zone, and sometimes a lower step-down zone for a fire pit or casual seating, using small changes in elevation instead of walls to separate them. For a tiny house lot, where you might have less than 1,000 square feet of outdoor space total, this zoning approach is the difference between a yard that feels cramped and a yard that feels like 3 small rooms. A single step down, 12 or 18 inches, is often all it takes to signal to your brain that you have moved from one space into another, without losing a single square foot to a physical wall or fence line. Builders have also leaned hard into low-profile glass and cable railings this year, specifically because they do not block sight lines, which matters even more on a small lot where every foot of visual space counts. When your entire yard is smaller than a 2-car garage, a solid wood railing can make the whole space feel like a box. Swap that for cable or glass, and suddenly your 800 square foot yard reads as open, connected, and larger than it actually is, purely because your eye is not stopping at a solid barrier 6 feet away. On the practical side, composite decking has become the default choice for these zone builds because it resists fading, mold, and warping without needing yearly staining, which lines up exactly with the low-maintenance reality most tiny house owners actually want. Nobody moves into 400 square feet to spend their weekends sanding and resealing an 800 square foot deck. Low maintenance is not a luxury add-on here. It is the entire point. The last detail worth mentioning is lighting, because a zoned yard only works after dark if each zone is lit separately. Recessed step lighting on the elevation changes, warm tone string lighting over the dining zone, and a lower, softer wash of light near the lounging zone all reinforce the same psychological zoning trick that the elevation changes create during the day. Get the lighting layered correctly. In a small yard, genuinely functions like 3 separate rooms from morning coffee through to a late dinner outside. Number 1, and this is the one I promised you, is the fold-down or hinged deck. Some tiny houses on wheels are built with a deck that is hinged directly to the trailer, folded up flat against the house for towing, and then folded down on site to instantly create a full outdoor room. This solves the single biggest problem with mobile tiny house yards, which is that a permanent deck cannot travel with the house. Build a beautiful fixed deck at one location, and the moment you tow the house somewhere new, that deck stays behind. A fold-down deck travels with the unit, so every time the home moves to a new site, the yard comes with it. The engineering behind a good fold-down deck is more serious than people expect. These structures are typically supported by heavy-duty structural hinges rated to carry real load, not the kind of light-duty hardware you would find on a folding table, along with adjustable outrigger feet that extend down to the ground and can be independently leveled to handle uneven campsite terrain. That last part matters more than it sounds like it should. Most tiny house sites are not perfectly flat concrete pads. They're gravel pads, slope lots, or raw land, and a deck that cannot adjust for a few inches of grade difference from one corner to the other is a deck that will rock, twist, or eventually fail at the hinge line. Adjustable outriggers are what let this kind of deck sit level and solid no matter what the ground underneath is actually doing. For anyone doing seasonal living or renting out a tiny house on platforms like Airbnb, a well-designed deck has consistently been one of the top factors guests mention in their ratings. Guests notice a great outdoor space immediately, often before they even notice the interior finishes, because it is the first thing they see arriving and the last thing they remember leaving. Combine a fold-down deck with the zone layout ideas from a moment ago, a dining spot, a lounging spot, some simple drought-tolerant planting, and a few movable containers, and you have a modern yard that shows up wherever the house does. That is the most honest, most flexible version of a modern tiny house yard that exists right now, and it costs far less than any of the fixed rooftop builds we just covered, while giving you outdoor living space at literally every single site you park at. So there you have it, 5 completely different ways builders in 2026 are solving the same problem. How do you give a tiny house a yard that actually feels modern instead of like an afterthought? From co-extruded composite decks wrapped around living trees, to a verified 34-foot rooftop terrace built at $106,000, to a gooseneck tiny house where your backyard is reached through a skylight, to a zone micro yard that uses elevation instead of walls, all the way to a hinge deck on structural outriggers that folds up and travels with the house wherever it goes. If you learned something new here, or you're planning your own build and want to avoid wasting money on the wrong outdoor setup, let me know in the comments which one of these 5 you would actually build. And if you want more videos like this, honest, research-backed, and built on real specs instead of marketing language, subscribe because that is the only thing that helps this channel keep making them. See you in the next one.